Certainly a pleasure to see all of you this morning and to have opportunity to study the life of Jesus. Several are on our minds, I know, but just a quick update on Brother Leo Plyler. He's not well at all, and hospice informed the family that if they wanted to see him, they needed to see him fairly quickly. So he has not responded, I don't think, verbally since Wednesday. And Joyce Landon's mother told me yesterday that he hasn't said anything coherently even on Tuesday. So anyway, keep the family in our prayers. But we're studying the life of Jesus. I've got a chart up here that announces it's 2 weeks from today. Can you believe it? 2 weeks from today, and our gospel meeting with the Hall brothers begins. And we certainly look forward to that. We should have a great day Sunday and a great Monday through Friday with Bill speaking on the topic of overcoming hindrances for God's people. I think the overall topic is hindrances to God's people in overcoming things. And he uses these people as kind of a guides. But anyway, Sewell's lessons are, of course, different each night. All right, so in the Mediterranean world, we start off here. I've actually revised every slide that I've used so far, and I've got some pictures this morning that I wanted to share with you, but I wanted to go back and kind of let you fill in the blanks, and I'm doing a little bit more geographically in our slides this morning than I've done earlier. So we have everything happening around the area of Palestine, and so here we have the life of Christ. So the 17 periods, we've talked about the 7 major divisions, the years of preparation. And how many years are there, Richard, of the years of preparation? About 30. And we're going to get pretty quickly to the end. The very fact that there's not a whole lot of Bible given. We read about Jesus' birth, early life, primarily in what gospel? Luke. It mentioned in Matthew 1 the announcement by the angel to Joseph, and yet is primarily in Luke. Mark has nothing to say about his birth. John, nothing to say, except he existed before his birth. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. So he was in the beginning before the beginning of the world began, and he obviously was in existence prior to his birth. But we're talking about obviously his years of service, his ministry on earth. So about 30. All right, here's where we begin now. Luke 1 records all the information primarily about the birth of John. All right, so chronologically now, the years of silence are broken with Gabriel's announcement to Zechariah in the temple in Jerusalem that John would be born to his barren wife Elizabeth, and he would go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. And that's obviously from Malachi 4. So we have Zacharias in the temple. He's accomplishing the burning the incense at the time that he would do it, and that was a big deal, as we already looked at. So she conceives, he goes home, she conceives, and she's about 6 months along, and that's stated specifically in Luke 1, when Gabriel appears to Mary up here in Nazareth. So we change scenes to Nazareth, and Gabriel appears to Mary and announces that she's going to have Jesus. And Mary evidently conceives about the time right after that. Then what happens is Mary leaves Nazareth and travels to Jerusalem to be with Elizabeth until the time Elizabeth has John, or for about 3 months. So that's in Luke 1:39 through 56. So she comes down, and then we have the meeting of Mary and Elizabeth. And when they meet, what happens to Elizabeth? The babe jumps, leaps in her womb. And there are the statements, Mary's praise to the Lord and Elizabeth's praise of Mary's baby, and then Mary's the so-called Magnificat. And then you have Zacharias enters the picture, and eventually in Luke, the first chapter, John is born. All right, she travels back then to Nazareth, and so by this time she's about 3 months along in her pregnancy, and she remains, that is, Mary remains in Nazareth until close to the time that she's to have Jesus. That's Luke 1:56, the second part of the verse. I know I'm doing more talking. Let's just glance at these verses for a second. In Luke 1, verse 56, Mary abode with her, with whom? With Elizabeth, for about 3 months, and returned unto her house. That is, Mary returned to her house in Nazareth. All right, then in 57 through 66, we have the birth of John and his name designated. And so Mary is up here in Nazareth. If you'll look up here on the chart for a second, Mary is up in Nazareth. And during this time, and while both Mary and Joseph are in Nazareth, an angel informs Joseph as to Mary's miraculous conception and announces his birth. So she's already, once she gets up back up to Nazareth, she's how long in her pregnancy? I know some of us talked about this after class. About how many months? About 3 months. And remember, there's about 6 months difference between John and Jesus. So she's about 3 months along, and obviously Joseph understands she's expecting, and so he's minded to put her away privately or privily, stealthily. But he understood she was a righteous person. He was a righteous man. And so there was no explanation except that she had committed a fornication, which she had not. And so the angel appears to Joseph and tells him what has happened with Mary. And so he says, don't fear, take her to you to be wife. And so he does, but they do not come together. Matthew 1 verse 25, he knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn son. So then there's not the perpetual virginity of Mary. They had normal relations afterward, and we knew that. We went over all that. The fact is, Jesus had several what? Several brothers and sisters. And so we go from there. All right, so about the time Mary expects Jesus, 2 or 3 months have come and gone, maybe 2.5 or so, due to Caesar Augustus' decree relative to enrolling for possessions for tax purposes and so on, Mary and Joseph travel to Bethlehem, fulfilling another prophecy as to where the Messiah would be born. It was quoted in Micah that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem Ephrathah. Okay, and so they come down from Nazareth to Bethlehem, about 85 miles or so, and at Bethlehem we have the events of Jesus' birth. All right, so Jesus is born, and they've come down, and we've already studied that. They're in a Holiday Inn, right? Actually, there was no room in the inn, and so he's born. She's wrapped in swaddling clothes, which is another way of saying strips of cloth, and he's laid in a manger. All right, that night, angels are where? Angels are where? I'm sorry. I threw you a curve. I didn't mean that. Shepherds are where? There you go. Tending their flocks in the nearby country. And so that night, an angel appears to shepherds who are watching their flocks outside Bethlehem, or in the country, it says. And he tells them how they can find Jesus. In the city of David, there is born unto you Christ the Lord. So they go and they find him, as the angel described, and they leave telling what they saw. They tell Mary, they tell others what they saw. And then the 8th day, Jesus is circumcised according to the law. We went back on all the way, I think it was Wednesday night, to Genesis, what chapter, where the covenant of circumcision is given? 17. And the circumcision was the outward sign indicating that baby boy was in this covenant relation with God. 2 promises affected by it. Not the seed, the land and the nation. Seed is not a part of it. Okay, here's a picture that I got from, that I thought was really better than anything I've got. Farrell Jenkins' blog. of the hill country surrounding Bethlehem. When we were over in that area back in 2009, Bethlehem just looked like a small city, shops everywhere. You couldn't tell anything. Of course, there is the Church of the Nativity, and whether or not Jesus was born there or not, we don't know. Here is a part of the backside to the Church of the Nativity where Jesus allegedly was born. And of course they make a big thing out of that, but we don't know. Here is a picture of a manger. You think about a manger as wood, and most of them were made out of stone or clay that was put together. And so Jesus, usually you find a picture of a stable in the so-called Christmas scenes, and there's hay all around, and it may have been hay due to the fact that the word manger can also be used as a synonym for, or as by metonymy for a crib or a stall. But anyway, that's a picture of basically a manger made out pretty hard. So the swaddling clothes would have helped. So he's circumcised in Bethlehem the 8th day, and then at 40 days, we have them moving to, obviously, to present them in the temple, and they're not moving, but they're traveling where? To Jerusalem, about 5 miles away. So at 40 days, Joseph and Mary present him in the temple at Jerusalem, and they offer the prescribed sacrifices. And then we have Simeon, and he was told by the Lord that he would not see death until he had seen the Lord's Christ. And so he does, and he gives words concerning him, Jesus, as well as Mary. And then they come, and then at the end of it, in this section, Anna is there, and she was an extremely young lady, right? No, she was extremely old. Brother Charlie and I were talking after class Wednesday. The New American Standard and some other of the translations, depending on the original text that they follow, will say that she was, what is it, Charlie, that she says in Luke 2, verse 37, she had been a widow. She's married 7 years, and she was then 84 years old, right?
She was advanced in age and had lived with her husband for 7 years after her marriage, and then as a widow to the age of 84.
Yes. You can do a lot of reading on that, the age there, and there's just, the wording is such that you follow one text and it would lead you to believe that she was 84, another that she had lived 84 years since as a widow. I was reading through one, he says, when Luke describes her as, where in verse 36, there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of great age, advanced in many days, the marginal reading says. She was of great age. That gives you the idea. She probably was 105, 106 maybe. But against that argument, if she were 84, that would explain a little bit more of how she could possibly be around the temple on a more consistent basis, unless she was in good health for that time. So you can do some reading on that. So at the age of 40 days, Jesus is brought there. Yes, sir.
I had read some more.
Yeah.
Had several places where she was above 100.
Yes. Yes, and that would be basically a translator's comment on it. Yeah, good. Okay, then sometime later, wise men visit them while they are in a house in Bethlehem. And that's where we've come to. Now, if you look at Luke 2 with me, look at Luke 2, you'll notice in verse 38, let's start our reading there. In Luke 2:38, coming up at that very hour, she gave thanks unto God, this is Anna, and spake of him to all them that were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. And when they had accomplished all things that were according to the law of the Lord, that part of the verse, as well as the second part of the verse, 39b, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. Really, between verse 38 and 39, we have all the events of Matthew 2. Now, if you'll look with me on our little workbook here, this is where we got to at the end of our class on Wednesday night. If you'll notice on page 13, or 12, the very bottom of page 12. I mentioned under M, do you all see that? M on page 39, page 12, M at the very bottom. Verse 39 states that after some time they returned to their own city of Nazareth in the region of Galilee. However, before they do, the events of Matthew 2 will occur. This includes the visit of the wise men, the danger from Herod, and the flight to Egypt and return. So, I think there has been maybe a little confusion on the part of some that what happens is they are here in Bethlehem, and they're in a year and a half maybe. They're in Bethlehem, and there's the edict from Herod that all the baby males, so they go down into Egypt, and they stay there until Herod dies. Then Joseph is told in a dream, those who are dead, those who are against you, who wanted your child dead, they're gone. And so he comes up, but he doesn't stay in Bethlehem then. He goes all the way up to Nazareth. And so that's kind of the order that things happen. Due to Herod's edict, they travel to Egypt, and then we'll go there. But we haven't actually read that. Let's start on our reading in Matthew 2. And let's read that first section, first paragraph together. Matthew 2 and verse 1, the very first part of 1 would have been likely that the wise men left the east. That's not the east of Bethlehem, that's the far east, way over past the Euphrates. And so they leave about the time Jesus is born. Well, they didn't, as Brother Farrell Jenkins said in something I read about him, I read on this thing, he said they didn't come on a plane, they came by plane. That P-L-A-I-N, rather than P-L-A-N-E. And so they came over, and it would have taken a long time for them to get here. So let's read. Brother Charlie, why don't we start with you this morning? 2, 1 through 6 to start with. Okay, so he's of the tribe of what? Judah. He will be a governor, a leader among his people, and he will shepherd them. John 10, Jesus would say, I am the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. And so a shepherd, he goes on to say, cares for his sheep. He lays down his life for the sheep. Yes, sir, Landon. Yes. Was born, exactly.
And I just thought, I don't know that I'd ever heard that parallel made, but
it makes. Yes, it's perfect sense. There's so many ironies on all that. The shepherds go as sheep to the good shepherd.
Right, and they're tending their flocks, and he's going to be the shepherd of.
Exactly, the shepherd. Only time it's used in the book of Hebrews is in the 13th chapter. He talks about the shepherd, the great shepherd of the sheep. And that's exactly who he is. All right, let's now, in chapter 2, verse 1, some of your translations may say after or when Jesus was born. After he was born in the days of Herod the king, who ruled from about 37 to 4 BC. Now, take that in mind. We think a lot of times people think, well, Jesus was born at zero, the year zero, you know. But actually he was born probably 4, 5, maybe even 6 BC, because he had to be born before the death of Herod. And I've got a note on that later on as to that, you know, how the reckoning of events was reckoned from the founding of Rome. And later on, a monk miscalculated, and so we'll say more about that later. So Herod, after Jesus is born, these wise men, or your translation may say what? Starts with an M. Magi, came from the east to Jerusalem. Where is he that is born King of the Jews? By the way, I hate to interrupt myself, but we've already established the fact that Matthew's emphasis is the connection of Jesus to whom? To the Jews. And an emphasis of Matthew is the kingdom of heaven. And so here, you know, he's shown in the genealogy of Matthew 1 to have a right to be king because he's of the right what? He's the right lineage. He's of the family of David through Joseph. And so in chapter 2, you have that emphasis that they are coming to worship. Where is he who is born King of the Jews? And we saw his star in the east and are come to worship him. Worship him as a babe. Isn't that something? So Herod hears about all of this. And now where did they come originally? To Jerusalem. And Herod hears about all this. Here come some people. Evidently, it was not just 3. They brought 3 kinds of gifts, but evidently there was an entourage of these wise men, and they brought 3 kinds of gifts, likely. And so Herod gets word of all of this and what they've been talking about. We've come to worship him who's born King of the Jews. And so in order to find out more exactly about this, they ask who? The chief priest and scribes, where? I think the key word in that verse is where the Christ should be born. Okay, now we've come to Jerusalem. The stars led us this far. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, not but about 4 or 5 miles apart. And so where is he born? And for we saw his star. And so then they quote from Micah 5 verse 2 and says he's to be born where? In Bethlehem. All right, so let's see what happens here. Brother Charlie, go ahead, 7 through 12.
Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, report to me so that I may come and worship him. After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star, which they had seen in the east, went before them until they came and stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly great joy. After coming to the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned by God in a dream not to turn to Herod, the Magi left from their own country by another way.
All right, good. All right, notice in verse 11, they came into the what? House. And what is your translation? How does your translation describe Jesus' age here? A newborn babe? A young child. So you've got that with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. All right, so we've got a different occurrence now. We've got sometime later, the wise men visit them while they are in a house here, still living in Bethlehem, possibly a little under 2 years of age by this time. Now, guys, I know I have this later on in the workbook, but just think, this is so different from the so-called Christmas story, you know, the nativity scenes. Who are the only ones there with Mary and Joseph the night he was born? Shepherds, not the wise men. And so they're in a stable, or he's in a manger, and when the wise men get there, it's possibly a year and a half later, and they're in a house, is clearly stated here. So, you know, that doesn't stop a lot of people from keeping the narrative they wanted, but that's what we have. We got some questions that'll probably lead us in several discussions, but let's look at that on page 13. The name Bethlehem means, well, it was the village where what famous king was from? David, known as the city of David. But the name Bethlehem, by the way, whenever you see the word bait, that's house of. So Bethlehem means house of bread. Jesus would later call himself what? The bread of life, John 6:35. And his whole speech is you've got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. He's not talking about, physical transubstantiation. He's talking about accepting who he was. All right, from where did the wise men come? Number B here. From the east. Yeah, what was that, Lee? Yeah, just the east. And I quoted McGarvey. McGarvey says this word designates an order or caste of priests and philosophers called magi, which existed in the east from a very remote period. So it's farther than the Euphrates River. We first find the word in Scripture at Jeremiah 39:13 in the name Rabbi in the book of Daniel, where its members are called magicians, and it is probably that Daniel himself was a Rab Mag, or consider that. The order is believed to have arisen among the Chaldeans and have come down through the Assyrian, Median, and Persian kingdoms. The Magi were, in many ways, the Levites of the East. They performed all public religious rites, claimed exclusive mediatorship between God and man, were the authority on all doctrinal points, constituted the supreme council of that realm, had charge of the education of the royal family. They practiced divination, interpreted auguries and dreams, professed to foretell the destinies of men. They were particularly famous for their skill in astronomy and had kept a record of the more important celestial phenomena, which dated back several centuries prior to the reign of Alexander the Great. They were probably originally honest seekers after truth, but degenerated into mere impostors, as the Bible record shows. Who is the famous magician in Acts, the 8th chapter? Who was Simon? And to his credit, he was what? He became a Christian. It's interesting that he bewitched the people, giving himself out as some great one, Simon the Great. Probably had a little wagon. I don't know that. But anyway, whatever it was, he was doing that. Then when Acts 8 says, when he saw what Philip was doing, the genuine signs and miracles, he himself, believed also and was baptized. But later, a little bit later, when Peter and John came from Jerusalem to Samaria, and he saw that through the laying on of the apostles' hands the Holy Spirit was given. He said, give to me also this power, that on whomsoever I lay my hands, they shall receive this. And Peter said, Simon, you have no part nor lot in this matter. Your heart's not right before God. By the way, the Catholics had a practice whereby you could buy specific offices in the Catholic Church. And you know what it's called? It's named after this man, simony. Simony was a practice of buying a position in the Catholic Church, just like, Simon wanted to buy the opportunity to lay hands on the people. And Peter and John said, your heart is not right. Repent of this thy wickedness. Pray the Lord if perhaps the thought on thine heart be forgiven. So then he asked them, you pray for me that these things not happen. We leave Simon with, you think, okay, he's a Christian at Samaria. Hopefully everything turned out okay. There's another one mentioned, and I mentioned him or McGarvey does in chapter 13. When Paul has come from Salamis to Paphos on the Isle of Cyprus, first missionary journey, there was a public official who was turning to the faith. And this fella, his name starts with an E. He was a sorcerer, it says, sought to turn the proconsul from the faith, it says. Elymas. Yeah, Elymas. So anyway, those are two instances in the book of Acts where we have the same word mentioned, same Greek word mentioned. All right, having noted this is C, what kind of character would God have seen in these men, evidently, to send them so far that they might learn of the Christ. No, Matthew 5, verse 6. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. So you might say that giving them the benefit of the doubt that they could have been honest seekers of truth, or at least if they weren't and they got there, maybe they became that. You'd like to think that at least. What question did it's obvious they brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, so even if they're mistaken on who he really is, they understand some way that he is a special one to be born. What question did the wise men ask in Jerusalem? D. Where is he, what? This born king of the Jews. E. From what Herod does, why was he concerned about the birth of Jesus? Well, it's obvious. Suspicious. A king would rise up in opposition to him. How did the scribes learn whether Christ was to be born? Well, they went back to the prophets. Yes, it was written in the prophets, Micah 5. 9 through 12 describe the meeting between the wise men and Jesus. Was Jesus in a stable and manger when the wise men arrived? No. He was in a what? House. Explain the chronology between this event and what is recorded in Luke 2, 8 through 20. The simple explanation, the events in Luke 2 were on the night that he was born. The events in Matthew 2 are sometime later, and they are in a house. All right. How many wise men does the Bible say there were, and what kinds of gifts did they bring? There were 3, right? No, does it say how many? This is interesting. McGarvey and others make the point. In Catholic tradition, they are actually named. Caspar, Malthazar, and Balthazar. But, that's Catholic tradition again. Just like they can point out where they think they can point out where Jesus was born and so on. The three kinds of gifts. They brought to him gifts. The tradition states that there were 3 because there are 3 kinds of gifts. But it doesn't say that there were 3 gifts any more than it says there were 3 wise men. There were 3 kinds of gifts. And I mentioned in the note 3 kinds, not merely 3 gifts are mentioned. Further, 3 kinds of gifts has nothing to do with whether or not there were 3 wise men. There could have been many or 2. Gold likely represented their honor for the Lord and could have been used to defray expenses by Mary and Joseph on the upcoming flight unto Egypt. I had never read about that thought until my sweet wife mentioned that. You think that in the providence of God, I think it was about, I'm representing you right, aren't I, sweetie? That in the providence of God, they brought the gifts, and that who knows that on a long trip into Egypt, being poor, they would have needed something, and here's gold to be used for that. I just thought it was a wonderful idea because I never read it. I'd not thought of it myself. Frankincense is a white rosin or gum obtained by slitting the bark of the arbor thuris. The best is said to come from Persia, very fragrant when burned. Myrrh is obtained from a tree in the same manner as frankincense. The tree is similar to Abyssinia. Myrrh means bitterness. The gum was chiefly used in embalming dead bodies as it prevented putrefaction. It was also used in ointments and for perfume, and as an anodyne, painkiller, it was sometimes added to wine. That reminds us of Jesus' time where or on what? The cross. There you go. Some see in these a symbol of Jesus' divinity, his royalty, manhood, which the wise men desired to honor. However, specific divine explanation or explanations are not given. We do know those occur in other places. All right. How did they know not to return to Herod? Yes, they're warned of God in a dream. That is down in verse 12. Being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. They went the different route. All right, so since Herod understands that he has been betrayed by these fellows, let's read on. Lee, if you would, 13 through 15 of Matthew 2. Matthew 2, 13 through 15.
Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise,
Okay, do you have a marginal reading for that passage where that's found? That's right, Hosea 11 verse 1. And it's a fascinating scripture. In that passage, he pictures God as this wonderful father who takes Israel as a nation by the hands and leads them up out of Egypt to where they were originally, to where they were certainly going. And God is there. And so he uses Israel as like a type coming out of the captivity of Egypt into, or we might say the bondage of Egypt toward the promised land. And here Jesus goes into Egypt with, he's carried down there by Mary and Joseph, and then he comes out, and that passage is fulfilled. I have some questions here. Under number 9, how did Joseph know to take the family back into the land of Israel? A what? Angel told Joseph in a dream. Into what city did Joseph bring the family? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I messed up on. I'm sorry. I missed. I missed the whole number 8, didn't I? No wonder I was thinking, this doesn't sound right. Look up number 8 on page 14. 7, the flight into Egypt. Contrast is immediately seen between verses 10, 11, and 13 through 15. The wise men fell down and worshiped Jesus. What does Herod want to do? Have him killed. That's right. How did Joseph know to take Mary and Jesus to Egypt? An angel appeared to him. That's right. What was significant about their going into Egypt then coming back out? It fulfilled a prophecy or statement by the prophet Hosea. All right, we'll say a little bit more about the nature of these prophecies. When I was teaching just the book of Matthew in school, I would try to emphasize the term kingship or king. And chapter 1 was always genealogy and birth of the king. Chapter 2 was honor and jealousy toward the king. Honor by the wise men. Jealousy by Herod. And you can kind of, put the substance of those chapters together with that. All right. In 16 through 18, Herod commands the slaughter of these innocent baby boys in what city? In Bethlehem. Let's read that, Landon, if you would, 16 through 18.
Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children, she refused to be comforted because they are no more.
All right, thank you. All right, so Herod sees he's mocked by the wise men. He's mad, and he has all the male children in Bethlehem. How old? 2 years old and under. And how did he know 2 was a good number? But that's right. It was according to what the wise men said relative to what they had understood. That's why we say that when Jesus and Mary and Martha, Jesus and his mother Mary, I'm sorry about that, guys. Jesus and his mother Mary and his Joseph were there in a house in Matthew 2 that Jews reckoned anything like 2 days would be anything over a day. And so anything up to 2 years could be 1.5, 1 3/4, 1 1/4. Anything over 1 would be reckoned as 2. So you think, well, they are there for at least a year in Bethlehem, and they're in a house, and now these events happen that were the visit of the wise men and Herod's edict to have them killed. It's interesting in verse 17. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. She would not be comforted because they were not. Rachel would stand for really mothers in where? Mothers in where, Lee? Yeah, primarily in Judah. Jeremiah, we want to remember, Jeremiah wrote right before and during the carrying away into Babylonian captivity. They was writing of the Jews in Jerusalem, and he was in Jerusalem, you remember. And so as he's writing about these waves of deportation, he's writing about this, then as the sons are being carried away into Babylonian captivity, can't you just picture the wind? It's just like, when during the Second World War and other wars we've been engaged in, and we didn't have news like we do now, and some young man is killed in action over in Germany or somewhere, and somebody comes to the house and the mother comes to the door, and it grips your heart. And can't you imagine the mothers in Judah as the Babylonians were taking them over? So Jeremiah comments on that Rachel that was great lamentations. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentations, and Rachel, the mothers of Judah, weeping for their children, and she would not be comforted because they are not. Why? They're taken away. And so in a similar way, you have the mothers, Rachel, as it were, standing for the mothers of these baby boys in Bethlehem that just happened to be born at the wrong time. And Herod has them slaughtered, a mass slaughter. And I'll tell you what, guys, what we're reading, I know we're studying the life of Jesus, but what we're learning is no different from politics throughout the centuries. If someone gets in your way, and I don't mean in yours personally, but when someone gets in the way of a political leader who is so mad and hungry for power, nothing gets in the way, including death of innocent people. And our abortion issue, this even now, and you see what's going on, it shows what people are willing to do for power and to stay in power and to placate the most immoral people on the planet, to placate them that they can continue to be in power. It is absolutely no different. And all this shows how evil men can become in their quest for power. Yes, ma'am, Sister Sandra. Yes. 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 Sorrow.
So there's that understanding of not being with your child.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Real good. Yes, good point. Good point. Okay. Let's see. B on number. We answered A, didn't we? Yeah. B, the slaughter of those infants in and around Bethlehem was like the prophecy quoted in verse 18 from the prophet Jeremiah. He described the crying of mothers in Israel who lost their sons to Babylonian captivity. A fulfillment or similar type to that was in Bethlehem. And McGarvey made, I thought, a tremendous explanation of the types of prophecy. Prophecies, just think, don't read that yet. Prophecies can be very soon, a speaking forth of something that's soon to happen, like Jeremiah did the Babylonian captivity. That's just a few years or in a matter of months or weeks. Something can be far-reaching, like Isaiah, or just like Genesis 3:15. The seed promise, overreaching way over. Some prophecies have dual fulfillments, like Isaiah 7:14, a virgin shall conceive and bring forth a son. Well, that was dealing primarily with Ahaz, and during the time that a young woman could marry and bear children, then they'll be in captivity. But the far-reaching prophecy dealt with whom? Jesus, born of a virgin, yeah. And so there are types. And then you can say the tabernacle is a type of the church. There's a sense in which there are fulfillments there. But go ahead and read this, and we've got to stop because of our time. Notice in the note under B, verses 6, that's Bethlehem prophesied. Verse 15, out of Egypt did I call my son. And 18, about the Rachel. Three kinds of prophecy. The first is direct and relates wholly to an event which was yet future. Second is a case where an act described is symbolic of another later and larger act. And the last is a case where words describing one act may be taken as fitly and vividly describing another later act, though the acts themselves may bear small resemblance. Matthew does not mean that Jeremiah predicted the slaughter of Bethlehem, but that his words, though spoken as to another occasion, were so chosen of the Spirit that they might be fitly applied to this later occasion. Now, the second note, and we're going to stop after this, the second note deals with the time of the birth of Christ. It's impossible to pinpoint the year of his birth. However, we can approximate from this and a few other passages. For many years before the time of Christ, events had been dated based on the founding of the city of Rome. In 526, at the request of the Emperor Justinian, a monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus made a calendar which was based on the birth of Christ rather than the founding of Rome. Dionysius fixed the birth of Christ in the year 754 of the city of Rome. However, the death of Herod was known to be in the year 750. So Jesus had to be born several months previous to the death of Herod, perhaps even over a year. Jews rounded up in counting time so that any part of over 12 months would be counted as 2 years. This would explain Herod's having all the babies killed 2 years old and under. All of this means that Jesus was likely born toward the end of the year 749, the founding of Rome, or around 5 BC, or at the beginning of the year 750, maybe BC 4. The miscalculation of Dionysius accounts for our understanding that Jesus was therefore born around 4 to 5, some say 4 to 6 BC. Does that make sense? Just a miscalculation based on the founding of Rome. We'll have to stop there, Lord willing, and pick up Wednesday and deal with how Jesus goes back to Nazareth. And we'll have the events of the latter part of Luke 2 when he's 12 years old and he's growing up there in Nazareth. Comment or question, guys? Anybody?